One. All right. So Larry, take it away.
All right. Hello, I'm Larry Moore, publisher of Broadstone Books, and I'm pleased to welcome you today to the August 2021 edition of the Broadstone Reading Stage. I usually say good afternoon at this point, but today we're spanning several time zones in order to present our first all-international reading event, where we're joined today by Estill Pollock, who's coming to us from Attleborough in Norfolk, England, where it's rather late in the evening already, and Esteban Olearte, who is zooming in on a mid-afternoon from Mexico City. One of the few good things that's been wrought by the pandemic has been this proliferation of online events. For only in this way would we be able to present these two poets on the same program. Aside from their transcontinental connection, why these two readers today? We're really not arranging our poets alphabetically, so it's only a coincidence that today is the Esteban and Estill show. Certainly, these two are poles apart stylistically. One poet, Estill, has been at this writing game for quite a while now. The other, Esteban, is making his full-length book debut. What they do have in common, I think, is that both of their books offer a strong measure of social and cultural criticism presented from a global perspective. And both contain something of modern mythologies for an age in search of meaning. Both, it should go without saying, are really fine poets who write compellingly and engagingly. Estill Pollock is my fellow native Kentuckian, for which reason I'm especially proud that he chose Broadstone Books to publish his first stateside poetry collection. He began his writing career some decades ago while still living in Kentucky, and his poems appeared in many well-respected regional and national journals. But for over 40 years now, he's lived in the United Kingdom. And you may notice when he reads that he has very little trace of Kentucky remaining in his accent. None, I think, noticeable. Upon settling there permanently and becoming a citizen, he took something of a break from writing. But over the past 20 years, he has reestablished himself as a poet of note, with several collections published in the UK and poems appearing in journals internationally. It's time that his work was better known back here in his homeland, and we hope that his new collection, Entropy, will be an important step in that direction. As his title suggests, this collection deals with a world in which, as another poet once put it, things fall apart, the center will not hold. As a chronicler of current conditions, he does not flinch from human tragedies, great and small, whether the stink of babies 3 days dead in Syria, or an old friend descending into dementia. But what keeps his book from being a grim undertaking is the sheer delight in his language and in his invention. For example, his fanciful account of an archaeological dig that unearths an ancient alien spacecraft, its hull a silk persuasion of stars and strategies cut from deeper dark. Is this a symbol of dread or hope? Perhaps Estill will answer that question today. The hope that I take from this volume is how, in his poetry, out of the chaos of entropy, he creates order out of the fragments of a broken world, and in doing so shows us a way to live. Esteban Olearte is another transnational poet whose writing spans cultures, borders, languages. Describing himself as Mexican-American, he is more truly North American, having grown up in a trilingual family and lived in all three countries that make up this continent, though so far not in Kentucky. So again, no trace of our accent to be found with him. He also describes himself as a poet, philosopher, and pseudologist. And if that last term is unfamiliar, it means a liar. I'll be pleased to hear him explain how he applies this term to himself and his work. But for now, I will instead call him a maker of fictions. And one such fiction is his amazing first full-length book, Transistor. Presented in the form of a religious document, it's part prophecy, part wisdom literature, part Jeremiad, with a bit of Song of Solomon eroticism mixed in for good measure. A secular, sacred, and profane text of social and cultural criticism. More than anything, it is a celebration of the pure incantatory power of words from a poet mad drunk on language, a modern Delphic oracle. It's difficult to describe Transistor, but it's impossible to forget it. We're in for an absolutely exhilarating time today. Let's get started. And let's first welcome Estill Pollock up to the reading stage. Hello, Estill.
Hello. Thank you for the invitation, and thank you certainly for publishing the new collection Entropy. Much appreciated. I do feel something of a stranger in a strange land coming back to Kentucky after all these, well, literally decades, but you've been very supportive and very welcoming, and I do appreciate it truly. So. I'm a little at a disadvantage in that I don't actually have a copy of my own book yet because of the international postage and so forth, but I've chosen a few poems from the book, just from the manuscript, so I'll be reading them tonight. That's okay. The first poem is in fact the opening poem of the collection, and it's Asides to Walt Whitman, where Brooklyn Ferry meets the seventh circle of Dante's Hell. East of the moon, dawn's fuse ignites across blue steel cumulus, and higher still, a warplane's glint, its contrail connecting coasts towards Gaza, towards Aleppo. In the Syrian camps, the stink of babies 3 days dead. In Sudan, the boy staring back at the camera, his belly like a poisoned pup's. And refugees and terror cells and the thump of Apache rotors. At each blade tip, the dust devil vortex and shares shifting for dollars. In Brooklyn, the sex slave crash, the Amex card, its golden encompassing fire. Across the sea of tranquility, a shadow, ghost footprints, a bardic technology remaindered out of mind. And we, here at war's end, and where the war begins, the moon, a watermark, fading before the starry mass, its fired hydrogen winds, our skull alight with our shame. Perhaps apropos of the current situation of Afghanistan, but it just goes to show some of these things. What comes round again. That poem was actually written about 10 years ago and still seems relevant today. The next poem is called Bone Dance. Do you speak with the dead? Whisper between this and the next life? Tweet eternity anon? Whether I on the Nazarene, Buddha cult, Jihad cult, cult of Artemis, of cows, eagles, fish, Xbox cult. People of the grave, people of the sky, of earth. What shall we believe? These others before you, their years like yours, dreamers, beyond this dance of bones. Archangel at the door looks you up and down, says, think I'd raise the fly-blown dead, validate priest, rectory, boy sex, busted banks and crackheads. I know shining machine parts, just purest light essence. Would retrofit salvation to your puny pig swill fate. You're dreaming. Robot sun, robot seasons, turning without you, without your subsequent opinion. The president, the army, did you vote? Did the money arrive okay? Does it matter? This smallness in the mind, in the mouth, a smallness of ideas, a meanness, robot dreams, whispers between worlds, breath, its persistence, its resolution. What you came with, you leave with. Your dreams spark, measured between pulses, clackety-clack, clackety-clack. The next poem is, again, written some time ago. You may recall the interrupted revolution in Ukraine, in which the Russians came in from the east, and effectively the country was split in two. This goes back, I don't know, 7 or 8 years, but it is continually in the news. There was a dissident from Belarus recently who was actually murdered in Ukraine for speaking out against the country in Belarus. So many levels on these political murders, intrigues. This poem was actually written at the time of the revolution, shall we say. It's called In Kiev. In Kiev, they eat concrete, sniper fire, flags. They need rubble. This bread, they say, we also eat. We have chained ourselves to our dead. Yulia Tymoshenko, in her wheelchair in prison, asks the crows to speak for her. She has learned crow language. In her defilement, where justice bleeds out. It is crows she takes as emissaries. They gather overhead where the streets of Kiev are devoured. Yulia Tymoshenko says to them, it is time. The president has fled. The president, whose heart is vipers, now in the east, looks for a compass. Someone has stolen his compass, the special one Putin gave him. Tymoshenko whispers to the crows, Say to my countrymen, they must eat the president's linen napkins, his best napkins, twisted into swan shapes. Say to them, the golden bath, the gilt-framed selfie, the bullion weight of bullshit, the palace itself must be devoured. Say also to my daughter, Yevgenia, shield maiden of these times, there are letters to be written in the blood of our heroes, folded in tear gas and a hungry future, between the dungeon and the power, the path, a blade's edge. The next poem is it's about Lloyd Byron. I'm sure everyone knows about Lloyd Byron. Specifically, it's about his first international hit as a poet, Childe Harold's Pilgrimage. At the time, he was still traveling in Europe, and this is a prequel, if you like, leading into the time of the publication of Childe Harold, and it's called Byron Before Childe Harold. The cantos eclipsed the limping gait, the debt and gonorrhea, but that was later, before he was God among the Greeks, a time of rough trade and regret. His mother's DNA informed the pudding cheeks, the second-rate inheritance of rented rooms and years counted down to birthright and a threadbare title. That colder climate stoked the rhymes, the masters wary of jumpstart meters, hexameters at Harrow undermined by claret and choir boys on the ottoman. His first thin volume, a pastiche of brat poems and classicist homage, his letters refer only to the good reviews. Anything else was quarrelsome. Moneylenders quibbled terms, attentive to his fault line bonhomie. Still, a quiet breath could soothe white noise, the mind's rasp. I am, he wrote, a mighty scribbler. From Athens, later, the first of pilgrimage, post-haste to London. Then praise. Nothing you have done before is equal. He shrugged. My mind required a crag to break upon. In Rome, he watched 3 robbers die. The Black Christ carried before them the banners, the soldiery, the scaffold and the guillotine, the heads lifted to the crowd. He said that with the first, his face grew hot and sickness swelled. But by the others, he was unfazed, reflecting, icons raised, so too may fall. A later portrait caught the gaze intaglio, the cut of cloud and catch lights reckoning a farther shore. Shadows haze the edge against a look, blade bright, fugitive. Next poem is called Cat. School children stare through exhibit glass, wrapped with the guide's description of the find. Cedar shakes dovetailed into a pretty box, reveal the yellowed wrappings. The tattered Tom, snagged, napping 3,000 years, appears to yawn. The children confer, one stepping forward asking, "What is it for?" A ritual death? A promise of protection against the devil beyond the door? The primordial, secret witness, culled from hungry forests? Whole armies, casting bones to know tomorrow? The uncertainty at the crossroads. A semaphore of galaxies bleeds out with no answers. The bare knuckle tenses of time grind down. Metaphors whet the light, the scything stars. What is it for? A goddess walks cold marble halls, her lips a beetle crush of red, as though reality and the devils mattered, and school children remained forever living. She speaks a name. In reaping light, the museum shimmers and is gone. A sleepy cat stirs, stretching lazily under the new sun. This is next poem, one of the more recent poems. I think when you get into your 70s, as I am, there's a trade-off of energy, of what is possible, I guess, because it takes a lot of energy to write poems, a lot of focus. I think this is something of that, I guess, really. Time passing, people passing, and so forth. It's called Goners. I slept my childhood in this bed, the headboard nicked from roughhouse games, and where my prized Swiss Army knife jagged initials deep as days. One bedpost cap, carved acorn-shaped, lifted with a twist, and there the gap for folded passwords to each treehouse, cave, or fort my mob of pals laid claim to. Goldie and Tom and the boy we called Maggot, Tom the Lesser, and Kathy's Carl, also known as Elvis, all now gone to ground. The bed springs twist and roll. Under my weight, they sing like hedgerow wrens, but no notes now in hidden nooks. Nothing of permissions, promises, or deeds. On Saturday TV, the Indians died, and none had speaking parts, just cipher momentum fading from mind. The way the extras fake a fall or take a bullet in the heart. Goldie got a new dad who called him Goldilocks and told him not to tell. Tom's sister gave her soft divide a secret name and whispered it to me. Bulldozers rake the street. The old haunts cleared. This heap of salvage, a rusted dream of nicknames and codes, of trickster light and eagle feathers in the dust. The late hour rides a fading seam, dusk dismembering night from day, and sleep would recognize me here, this shadow place that swallows light and will not blink. Another more recent poem. I think Larry might have mentioned this actually, a poem written around issue of dementia. It's called Visitor Hours. A Fender Strat slung over your shoulder. You leaned into the bandstand mic. Your harmonies fuzzed by the nightclub's down-market speakers. The snapshot nailed your raucous cool. 1964 and all that. Recognition spikes or troughs. Today, you remember me a little. Our cup of tea enough to stopper the mind's drift a moment. The photo, a memorial to all you were. No time shift to conjure lost minds. Only the carer bringing tea for you, for me, the visitor who says again today, I know you. You lean across the teacup, your look curious, wily. Again today, you know me? Beyond the window, spring shakes loose white flowers from the trees. The hedgewise birds chasing their own long notes into deeper veils. Shadow branches crawl across the wall. We are all we have. Repeating, repeating, repeating their fragile disposition. The clock face folded, time twisting, always just out of reach. The next piece is called Walking Home. The dead are walking home. They lean against us. They await dry leaves, a downy dust of trust and resignation. To them, we seem familiar. the way swifts catch high, hot currents in the blue. They chat and laugh and roll call all they thought important. Medals won for running fast, or fastest download speeds, or faster still, their lives till now. To them, we seem familiar. A simple consequence informs the pace. They sigh, the sound of old leaves stirring. Their flesh, a fade of lacy veins, waxy, cool to touch. A dough that will not dimple. They are gathered, broken stalks, bound to fainter fates. Their dreams like old straw hats. Even now, the shabby brims set rakish. We came this way before, circling and circling, a kind of eternity. All that can be done is done. They lean against us as though we could remember. We are walking home. Okay, I've got 2 or 3 shorter pieces from actually the final section of the book. Final section of the book is called Water Harp. It was written a few years ago, actually. The poems are written as a contained sequence, but they are of a similar style, and I think because of that, I've just chosen, a very small number to finish with. Poems don't have any titles. It's just by their first line. That's all they're known by. At the window, last night's words, ashen against the glass. Black petals in the vase, delicate as the hour fading from us. Their deep scent stirring us from deeper dreams. Sleepwalkers, we remember not knowing the restlessness will pass. What the mouth said before it filled with ash. Somewhere in the room, dawn, its thin light whining, already awake. A mill in the woods. Beneath it once, water met the wheel in closed orbits. The floor gapes, a ravine below, the living that was made here, silted over. I never thought to stay, rehearsing such small horizons. The song of water, of tumbling blue filaments. The song of husks, their finer dust suspended in the light. In the eaves, birds clack dull refrains, the weight of stones unrecovered. Whose ghost guards the stricken spire? Salt tears to turn the spirit wheel. I set myself beyond the boundary, too late for this inheritance, a way through these memories, a door, a password for the watchman. This is the final poem. You have escaped your hollow heart, the faded guilt of book spines, cold coffee in cold rooms. Your body, your mind settled into itself. Familiar ghosts calling to you, this way, this way. The old house, crumpled floor by floor. The downspout at the window, mimicking rivers another century flowed through. The rain pinched into black channels. And you remember the riverbank, its spooling vista, the evening warm, insects hovering, the sheen of their flights caught in failing light. You stretch out your hand, touching rain splashing, ancient water, clear, unrepentant. You are waves, their memory. Thank you. That's all I have tonight.
Oh my goodness, Estill, bravo! What a powerful reading you've given us, and an absolute joy for me to hear those words in your voice with your cadence. I wish I had at least an hour just to respond to the various thoughts that have gone through my head listening to you, but I'm going to say for now that like Byron, as you described him, I think we can say of you that you are indeed a mighty scribbler, and what a pleasure to hear from you today.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right. But I am going to move right on to another mighty scribbler who is going to join us. Esteban, step up, unmute, and let's carry on with the day's readings.
Yeah, wow. Increíble. I wish I had gone first because now it won't be as powerful as that was. Thank you so much, Mr. Pollock. It was incredible. Thank you so much. Well, I would start with what Larry mentioned before, especially with the term pseudologist in English. As somebody who lies, I see it as somebody who studies liars. So, and I think that that's something that happens in Transistor, is that you're looking at situations where, ¿cómo se dice? Where you're looking at the news, you're looking at people who feed you news and saying, well, is that true? Is this true? If you go between CNN and Fox, it's completely different. So I wanted to address that immediately. So I'm not the liar exactly. I'm studying those who lie. And I self-identify as somebody who takes part in that kind of an experience. But again, first of all, I would like to thank Larry, Stephanie, everybody at Broadstone. This has been an incredible experience for me to have my first book published with you guys. So thank you so much. And again, Mr. Pollock, incredible reading. If you're interested in having a dialogue in email, I'd love to continue in a different format. Transistor, to me, the book, Larry originally rejected the book, and he said it was too cold, and it was something that they didn't necessarily want to publish, or people didn't like that kind of poetry because, and I totally agree or agreed, and I had to convince him. I had to convince Senior Larry because it's true. This is a type of book that is, it's cold, it's existential, and a lot of the time people want more emotion and togetherness, I would say, than normal, right? So I had to convince Larry that Transistor is a book that might have an audience. And Transistor was written before the pandemic, for example, and yet it carried similar themes throughout the book or throughout the poems that were taking place because of the pandemic. So, for example, the face masks, the general idea that you're rolling along with the machine of society, and then all of a sudden it stops, and you're trying to figure out who you are when society has stopped, and your current idea of going here or there or whatever it is over, and then it reflects back upon yourself, existentially and phenomenologically, right? So I think I finished writing it in 2019, like right before the pandemic started, and here too in Mexico City, it's fairly normal because of the pollution for people to wear face masks and stuff like that. So that wasn't a new thing, but everybody having one, well, that was a new thing for everybody here, and then globally, I suppose, as well. But again, very thankful for Larry and Broadstone for this design and this book in publication. I'm going to read from the beginning of Transistor and then a few other poems. But again, it won't be the same style as Mr. Pollock, which is obviously a much more trained reader. So please bear with me. Oh, and I have to say, Noriela, my 75% better half for the book as well, because I dedicated it to her. So the book is called Transistor. The first part of Transistor begins as this. It's written in the biblical format in terms of there being a 1, a 2, a 3, a 4, but I don't pay attention to that because I don't remember that either when I went to Catholic school. So the history of Transistor. Who is sage and who is never seen despite the live feed is assumed, is projected in the jet airplane white twin chemtrail under which we contemplate Transistor, the limits of our monumentality. The discovery of environment, the creation of environment has helped to destroy it. So the prelapsarian joy you remember when you remember what life was like before the occupation is light and a willfulness in unusual places. Before the occupation, there was geography, toy, dish soap, backyard, bubble guns, neo-visibilities, and willfulness in unusual places. The stem as it contracts into the calyx in city architecture, with a blotch of super blood moon on your 18 t-shirt, when infinity was just a figure 8. It was the sycamore, amor, and not the aguacate. In a sudden blur of hash and sudden hot sun, cuate, and downtown the light was like boiled wine. This should dissolve in your mouth. And I like when my glasses fog over coffee and then slowly clear, and I come to. Getting a second-hand high is not the same. The stem as it contracts toward the calyx in city architecture is not the same. And the city girls in knee socks having a second mirror stage with social media roll in a Bluebeard cigarette paper the color of rose cava, a new view, a new neutrality, if it comes to that, and Candy Crush as it affects your sense of pattern recognition should dissolve in your mouth, and the birds and flowers are mushrooms and rivers, and the walls and the windows are trees, if you're still into the trees. I still climb one close to Ruth's, even though I ride by it most days. And if you go by Ruth's on Sunday, she's making sauerkraut and homemade sweet pickles. And if you go by Ruth's on Sunday, tell her I will be by for pierogies and strudel. And if I don't show up, it means she won't either. And the occupation has begun. As Larry said, there's a series of footnotes at the end of every page. In the introduction, I would read some of them during the poems. This one is by Walter Benjamin. Method of this project, literary montage. I needn't say anything, merely show. I shall purloin no valuables, appropriate no ingenious formulations, but the rags, the refuse, these I will not inventory, but allow, in the only way possible, to come into their own by making use of them. This continues. Poem 2, The Secret Life of Foam. Transistor broadcasts traffic reports, powers of suggestion, chances of allegory, and everyone exits in headsets as exiles. And the morning bus becomes a statistic, and you become what you wore or were told to wear, a mathematized average, as jurors across the aisle eye your name brand, your freedom to choose. You can see it in the stress field of any face, the act normal posture in park statues, this quiet panic. The double pane windows as they distort perspective, Leave it to a painter to distort perspective. Leave it to me in a clinical, eggshell, off-white, public unisex downtown, the power of suggestion. If later the blue slab of Planck goes off gray, the concrete gray of public art, if that's what art is, the invaginated, reversible tracksuit and the stereotypical white blank when the concept of a hit became hazy, uncanny. To avoid detection, play dead, but to move without being detected, just play along. Dip the gauze pads in soda water, then cover the mouth and nose, and then proceed through. You should find to your immediate left a place to depressurize, a place to let go, standardized cardboard after spring sunset. Beyond that, there is hardly anything left to emphasize, besides the windowsill being somehow coincident with your waist, all that sensible fenestration you feel so frustrating to always be fucking with. I'm going to skip along. That's the first couple poems in Transistor, and I'll skip along to a couple more. This one I think I had was The Coming of Interiority. And I found in Transistor the titles were almost meaningless sometimes, but you could kind of get inventive with whatever you wanted to say after the poem was written. You didn't necessarily have to follow along with, okay, I have a title first, and then go back and apply a title to something titleless. So The Coming of Interiority. That I could use the word extend so often, you might confuse it for expand. That is spirituality. The cinematic experience of time is a stitching of instance into instances of, isn't it? And where the painted trees are more tree-like than the trees themselves, in city parks, inside office buildings, the newly neutered wear nicotine patches for each body part under duress, under dress shirts and sweatpants, where they also pack handguns. It's sometimes safer to frisbee in deep sea atmospheric diving suits than in cargo shorts with removable pant legs and a demilitarized grenade pouch. Thus have I heard, it is always this application of the eye which distorts the ear. From behind a glass facepiece in a copper helmet, I contemplate ambush, planting ivy in pickle jars, while the hand-painted women are made of black clay and show us a culturally appropriated stereotype, a pendulum in a box called super channel, change and impermanence in the unsun sand, somewhere close to where I left my DNA. City infrasound influences the organic and inorganic alike, and so in the local disturbance patterns that follow pedestrian flow, I contemplate ambush, the fact that the rope isn't long enough to make a proper noose, and the lady moose. As rooms, as spatial fragments, one's being in space produces an inevitable diffraction. The room is a dissection, an anatomy of love, a stanza. I'm going to move along in the book. To something I thought was extremely important within Transistor, which is the poem Being in Simulation. I spent a great deal of time reading a lot of existentialists and ontology and phenomenology and simulation, the idea that we're actually living in that now, impressed me quite a bit. So this is based on that idea. Again, it's called Being in Simulation. While traveling, you tend to trust a train of thought more thoroughly. While traveling, you trust the ambient transients, sleeping in coats inside stations, in places that never look too out of place or staged. Like those self-supporting, self-replicating, wall-less architectural dome-like structures, as they tend to contrast new norms, while tensile strains among rods connected by ropes. In the interchangeability between towns and stations, you start to change, finding places to self-medicate first, paying someone pocket change at the door you trust to keep 6 in case you trip out, which you often do, telling your people you don't. Further discontinuity half a block down under a part of the basilica that'd been half walled in, where the public and public art is private. You slow motion what you can postmodernize. You postmodernize, seeing photolab acid where they see sunlight. Curatorial blocks of sun and globs of sticky housefly glue paper. Making clay figures of you leave behind in hotels, at restaurant bars, of a stick figure of you clothed in cigarette paper with a bottle cap hat. A passion for fragments, runes and debris, a peripatetic wandering about is habitus. Romantic partners through chance encounters. As a way to suitor a split in personality, you split screen while traveling is habitus. Even though you still look for neighborhood in neighborhood markets, the faces of the local farms people look foreign, pre-filmic, and unfamiliar. And so you return to the station for the familiarity, which is neighborhood, or as it comes through in you to seek it out as habitus. At an outdoor kink movie house where they be showcasing shoegaze, pictures of which look like maps, a passion for fragments, recurring themes, Disneyfied kids at window displays on the plastic monkey bar Jungle Book. But in the park, you clock a 5-spot hustlin', reading poems to park statues who give you neighborhood, a sense of place, entitlement. If neighborhood is a periphery, then periphery. In the interchangeability between towns, you alias while transient, changing into thrift store clothing, you stick figure back into the station's stock footage, transparent, clothed in cigarette paper and a bottle cap hat, unidentifiable, 100% transparent. God wants man to fulfill his commands as a human being and with the quality peculiar to human beings. Martin Buber. another from the same section called Uploader, which I especially like because everybody's uploading. Everybody's an uploader. When called for by the uploader, which is the app, you walk the wall screens of windows, all the advertisement, billboard, and public space downtown. The physics of allowable sway, which is a pause of movement at a site of loss. This love of place, even if science is asocial and yet built into the building, just as the culture of travel is packaged as pre-cooked. And so you pause for the pathos at a post-industrial site of loss, a little lost, museal, and on such private voyage, being called to upload, you upload what you pretend to pauper at the curb edge of the park proper, stepping out, if that's how you pauper, weary of shortcuts as you upload the park proper, where the arborists are on their smoke break, vandalizing the park grass. And so it all comes apart, and you remain the other's other, while the new software comes apart in your hands, which was part of your hand, walking the wall screens of windows downtown, uploading the documentation on the otherness you are when called for to, you realize the uploader is you in a pause of movement at a site of loss and a little lost. The walls facing you are affixed to fixed 10-foot metal rod-like fingers from a roof in the front room. Don't walk through triangles, hanging ferns, conversations. Other suspected concrete structures show silhouettes of people walking from foot level. So in the background, you see young couples fucking or about to, in advertisement billboard propaganda for perfume in a downtown public space, or in the city park behind the industry, a post-industrial pause of movement, some young people fucking in the park, their clothes still on, classlessly classy, in a pause of movement at a site of loss, but with this sudden love of place, and with just the right amount of suspension from the protocol status quo to sustain it, the sudden oddness of joy. A hairy girl is a happy girl. De-thaw the flowers, the fog in the form, if you call that fog, from foot level, as if young people know how to fuck, you laugh, walking the wall screens of windows downtown, not sure, in a pause of movement at a site of loss and a little lost, middle aging. Gonna read one more, and I think that's it. So this last one is called Medicine Ball, something anybody over 40 practiced with in elementary school, everywhere. No? Medicine Ball. The neighbor's children rake our yard leaves, then play in the leaf pile after. And their father comes out after to rake and bundle the leaves after his children have gone in. Most buildings don't move, though some perception of motion is implied, suggested by how they're built. That evening, I was at the window in the hall watching the leaves get raked, and my eye blurred. And although the leaves will blur with the wind in them, it was my one eye that blurred them, smudged them red, and I felt weak enough to have to sit down. I suddenly felt insulted, as if children know how long the leaves take to play dead. I considered a future of memory loss, the recurrent numbness of it in facial tics, a drooping left arm, trouble seeing, trouble walking. I slept. Judith, Judith brought us supper, and she and Emma visited. And so the walls I was facing were also moving, partitions of moving glass. In bed, I start thinking whatever happened is the first step in mom's inherited dementia, and not just the distraction you need to be distracted from, where you think what you see in others might help them maybe see themselves. But being the distraction, being there with a warm blanket and with vital signs. An intruder on the porch in November with a warm blanket and with chamomile tea I leave untouched, weary of shortcuts. I would be wheeled down main roads where the word churchyard would still mean something. The confinement of identity, being identifiable as, and my mind wear me out, and my thoughts take me to my funeral. Who comes? Saturday, Alice comes to rake and bundle leaves, a distraction, and I take 2 effexors. And my mom visits me, and I am my mother, a pendulum metaphor for fall. Conditions of domesticity, economies of scale, replicated visual patterns in quilts, OG-shaped A-frame wartime row houses look forlorn, if that's the right word. And Monday, we pack and drive to Salisbury, where we have lunch, and I cannot go on, a recurring theme, and have to taxi home, unfaithful, an intruder at lunch. I return to the porch, a portmanteau of myself, and don't go to big retirement party for Bob at Becky's, and theorize it's not what you did, but what you do with what you did. And so I meditate simultaneous mountain luminosity and lost mind, which is an effect of the effexor. And the orange sunlight in the air like aubergine is audio, in that it faintly arcs up, and the men carrying ice blocks wear weight belts and lift me like a medicine ball. That would be good for me.
All right. All right. Thank you so much, Esteban. And I was glad to have an explanation that you are a student of liars, an observer of liars, and that makes a lot of sense, certainly in terms of the cultural critique you offer. And I also want to respond. I'm so glad you brought this up, because this happens more often than some might think. I'm not always right when I say to people, I'm not sure about this. And my recollection of when I first received your submission, and I think when you talked about, I found the work cold, and I think that's cold in the sense of the intellectualism of it. And
no, I agree. I agree.
Yeah. And what I recall is I said, yeah, I really don't think that this is going to be a good fit, but I'm just really not sure that I can imagine the readership, but I want to read the rest of it. And of course you sent the rest of it to me, and I think rather to your surprise as well as to mine, I wrote back and I said, you know, I've read it now and I can't imagine not publishing it because
no, exactly. That's
it's
failed to.
so I want to say to all of you poets out there submitting work, you know, editors aren't always right, and sometimes you just need to kind
You
of
have to convince them.
help them through the process of coming to understand your work.
No, but I remember those emails as a beautiful experience too, because it was authentic what you were saying, and it's like, oh,
Yeah.
yes, I know, but let me, you know what, let me try and convince.
Yeah, and let me see. This was also a case, and this is also again just a little bit of craft talk here. You know, it's hard when you're trying to judge a large work from a small sample, and although for practical matters we usually start out by looking at a snippet of work. Sometimes you have to really see the entirety of it. And
Sure.
So that was certainly the case with yours. What strikes me about both of our writers today, and we have some time, I'm going to see if anyone else wants to have anything to bring up about them, but I think both of you are very adept at crafting out of chaos. I mean, Estill, you address that very specifically in the title of your book with entropy. And I mentioned in my introduction how I feel like what you're doing is constructing worlds out of fragments. In your case, bringing in elements of traditional culture. I think about that line in your cat poem where there's a question: what is it for? You know, how do we mine our past? How do we mine tradition to find meaning? And I contrast that, if that's the right term, with some of what I see you doing, Esteban, where my sense when I'm reading your work, and certainly with hearing it today as well, is there's a point of just kind of latch on, hold on for dear life, because what you do is kind of take us on this real roller coaster of a ride through contemporary culture and through that chaos. And every once in a while, there'll be some recognizable bit of life that you can kind of say, oh yeah, I see where I am. I have my orientation. And then you kind of knock the props right out from us, under us again. And I take from that, some of what you're doing is that sense of living in simulation, the fact that we're kind of living in a world of artifice now, a world where the painted trees are more real than the actual trees.
Than the trees themselves.
Than the trees themselves.
I would say that absolutely, because, and again, with the pandemic, I think that brought that reality home, like, you know, individually speaking, I mean, you're wrapped up in the role of the machine, and then all of a sudden you stop and you realize, well, what am I doing? Or what are we doing? Or, you know, and then you can't do this and you can't do that. So what were we doing? What were we believing in? And in terms of politics and society and those kind of things, but with irony and a sense of fun as well.
Yes,
not with judgment or whatnot.
And there is a great deal of fun to be had in your book. With it was talking about kind of that, if there's that intellectual chill, if you will, there's also a lot of just pure joy in the language. As I said, you're kind of word drunk, and Estill stepped away right now, but I was going to say of both of you that I think you create word worlds out of the chaos that you find yourself in. And although we heard two very different sorts of worlds presented here today, I think that's a commonality of what do we do? How do we receive this fragmented life that we have? And then how do we construct some kind of environment within that? And I think both of our poets today have been very instructive in that fashion. We have a few minutes, and we have a small enough group that I feel comfortable saying if there's anyone who has a question or comment for either of our readers today, this would be a good opportunity for you to unmute and identify yourself and ask your question. Any takers?
Could I just say something?
Please do. Nice to have you. Yeah, rejoin us, please.
Just listening to Esteban's poems, I see the point that was made perhaps on his initial submission to you. Listening to the poems in a series, my impression is that there's quite a vibrant contemporary edge to it. There's a cumulative energy about it. Some poems, some poets, everything is listed word by word by word. Every word is almost a symbol in itself. But with this poetry, you have this rolling effect that pulls in so many seemingly disparate views and thought processes and philosophies, and it all comes to, well, it comes to the end as a poem, but it's almost an arbitrary end, because you get the feeling that those poems could continue for days and be the same because of the observations that are being made about contemporary culture. So in that regard, I think you to be applauded for that. It reminds me very much of, well, I hate to use an archaic word in some regards, but beat poetry. It has that loose vibrancy about it. I've used the word vibrant before, but it does have that. It's a kind of loose familiarity, because it's a shared cultural experience, I think, not just for Esteban or for me or for Larry or for whoever, but everyone who walks out of their door into a landscape, whether it's urban or semi-urban or whatever it happens to be, they experience these things. And you can experience these things either walking down a street in a town or a city, or in your, I don't know, in your study. As here we are in a study looking at people all over the world online doing different things, listening to different things, and having different opinions about what they've heard. So for that reason, I think it's a very powerful statement, the poetry we've heard from Esteban tonight.
I thank you so much for that. And honestly, to me, that means like the resolution of a poem, which I don't understand how to resolve. So there's this ongoing, it's like, okay, well, that's 2 o'clock and now it's 5 o'clock, but the day hasn't ended. So there's no resolution, and resolution is kind of a thing that we as humans create to, in a way. I don't know, but I agree, and that might be a failing too.
Well, I think something to consider as a writer, someone who's now got your first book, as it were, to consider, would that sense of resolution change if your style shifted? Would you need to approach it differently, or could you push forward with that same energy in a different style? I'm not sure that would be possible. I'm not saying it's a better thing to do that, but as you've said, there's a point of resolution that in some cases is almost arbitrary, because you can stop a poem at a particular place, but because of the energy you've built up behind the poem, and it's effectively bowling along and taking the audience with it, the audience has become almost dreamlike, listening to the images unfolding as they hear them. And then suddenly it stops. And it's quite startling as an effect, I must say. It is quite a startling effect. It's very well done. I don't know if you edit it like that, but it is quite a successful effect, I must say.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the advice, honestly, from
There's no problem.
Somebody like yourself.
That's
very good.
Just another writer.
Yeah.
Right.
All the same problems, just doing it longer. That's all.
Right.
Well, and I'll jump in and say that it's an interesting point that you make, Estill, about the oral effect of Esteban's reading. And it's a different effect when you read it on the page. So this is a case where there was, and I mean this in a positive sense, there was almost a drone-like character of the reading today that I think was part of that hypnotic effect of being pulled into this world, into this simulation of a world, if you will, and carried along, as I said at one point, just sort of latch on and hang on, for dear life, and hope that you occasionally get some points of reference along the way. But I did find it compelling in a different way than I found the words on the page, as is so often the case with poetry.
Yeah, I think
as John said initially, when he referred to certain philosophical writings, I think what it comes down to is that existential question: what is real?
Mm-hmm.
And you can tag anything onto that. It doesn't matter if it's the type of poems that Esteban's writing now, or writing future, or something I do, or something anyone else does. You can go through any number of documents or publications or whatever, and you'll see the same thing. But the tagline, if you like, at the top: what is real?
Mm-hmm.
And everything tags onto that, I think. So he's a good find, Larry. He's a good find.
Yes, well, you both are, and I'm delighted that both of you have wandered into
I've not been found, Larry. I was lost time, but I just kind of wandered back through the door again. That's the only thing. I just lived out for 40 years from Kentucky. That's all.
That's all right. Well, and this is a good way to start to wind it up then, to say that indeed I am delighted that for both of you to have been found. I'm glad that Estill has found his way back over to perhaps a readership and audience over here in North America, and I agree with you, Estill, that Esteban is quite the find. And as I said in my opening remarks, I think it's always wonderful to pair writers that are at different points in their careers and see where are the similarities. I love the fact that the two of you had some craft talk here today, because I think those of us in the audience, whether we're poets ourselves or not, always learn from listening to that exchange. And I hope that you two will carry on a correspondence beyond this. I'm going to say in the minutes, if we've got just a moment, if anyone else has anything they wanted to ask or add, this would be the moment to step up, and then otherwise we're going to wrap up the day. Going once? All right. Well, let's all applaud again for our splendid readers today, as I had promised. Indeed, an exhilarating day. In so many ways. Thanks to both of our poets today. Thanks to those of you who joined us in the audience. If you are new, many of you are I won't say old timers. We haven't been doing it that long to be old timers, but you're familiar faces. But to any of you who are new joining us, we do this every month. So we haven't in fact announced our date or lineup for next month yet, but if you'll check our Facebook page, or if you'll check our website, BroadstoneBooks.com, we will shortly be announcing our September lineup of readers, which will be our 12th Zoom reading event. So meanwhile, I wish you all well. Go out. The links to our books today they're in chat. If you like what you heard, if you want to support our work, nothing expresses your love more than buying a book. So if you haven't already made these books part of your library, then feel free to do so. And thanks again to everyone. And Stephanie, I think you can take us out. We will see you all in the Zoom room another time. Bye-bye. Thanks.